This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, begins the show with this week's grain market outlook. Dan discusses the USDA Acreage and grain stocks report and how it could move the market. K-State row crop plant pathology specialist Rodrigo Onofre continues today's show by reviewing corn diseases that growers could be seeing in their fields. He also says how fungicides can be used to control them. Ending the show is Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, with a weather update. Chip explains what weather Kansans can be expecting moving forward and why. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with some grain market information from K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Dan, starting off our conversation a little differently than we usually do and talking about the USDA Acreage and grain stocks report that comes out today, the 28th, and how it can make some moves in the market.
Yeah, as we're talking now here at 11 o'clock this morning Central Time, the USDA will put out numbers on both acreage and, as you say, on stocks, and buried in that on quarterly usage that have the potential to impact the markets. And probably most of the attention will be on the acreage report. The amount of corn acres in the United States last year was the final number is about 94.64 million. We estimated in the prospective plantings report at the end of March, earlier this year, that we were down to about 90 million acres and change. And here I guess the pre-report estimates are that we'd be at 90.35, 90.4, something like that. And these numbers were taken for corn. Surveys were taken representing June 1st conditions. And since that time, we've had major moisture flooding events in parts of the northern Corn Belt, particularly northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, over into South Dakota, and some moisture impacting also off into Nebraska. So when we get that report, you'll see most market analysts taking those numbers and saying, okay, how then do I further adjust this? These planted numbers represent the destroyed acres, flooded acres, really problem acres off in that one area. So I think we'll look at the planted acres numbers in particular, but I think those adjustments for actually impacted acres will come in the harvested acres figure. So we'll be watching for that and seeing what impact that has both on total harvested acres, but also kind of get back to that same issue of rain makes grain until it doesn't. And when it floods it out and causes the need for replanting and all sorts of problems. So we have that area, which is, again, Iowa, southern Minnesota, even on over into South Dakota, is a pretty important area. And we'll see what impact that has. So basically the market's expecting a little bit of an increase from the about a 350,000 acre increase from the earlier March 28th prospective plantings report. And for soybeans, really about the same change. Again, we had 83.6 million acres of soybeans planted last year in the United States. Prospective plantings figure came out at 86.5, so up about just under 3 million acres. And the expectation for this report coming out later today is that 86.5 figure will go up to about 86.75. Again, about 250,000 acres higher. So there's always the chance for surprises in the market. And in this case, I guess it's hard to say, farmers vote with their planters with regard to what they think profitability will be. And in in our own thinking, we had all this news about major crops coming in South America that was frontal in farmers' thinking during the May time frame. Yeah, there were some risks and things up and down, but generally thoughts were that we weren't discouraging. If we did discourage acres, it wasn't enough to make a big difference. But so what we have now with these numbers is playing into this broader market opinion, or some would say a narrative that we have plenty of acres, that we've had moisture, in some areas too much, but still fairly decent crop conditions, no major threats to these crops, and we've seen no threats to U.S. production this year. And it doesn't seem, at least that's the market's opinion, doesn't seem that these USDA acreage numbers will change that very much. But we shall see. Also, numbers will come out again for sorghum. That's a big crop, of course, in our part of the world. 7.2 million acres last year in the United States for sorghum, 6.4, just under that in the prospective plantings report projected for this year. Expectations that will be up about 150 plus thousand acres for sorghum. We'll be watching that. And if that happens, a lot of that's happening in our neighborhood, out here in central western Kansas on down into Oklahoma, Texas. So we'll see where that plays out. And we'll have also these numbers to look at for winter wheat, spring wheat, durum, et cetera. And so we'll see where that goes. The other side of that report that'll come out will be on the stocks side. And I understand the stocks numbers, but what we're really looking for are the hidden numbers, i.e. the calculated use. And that from these reports we get estimates really of feed use. You have a pretty good idea of exports, of milling, of ethanol, of renewable diesel, et cetera, all of that production from different surveys that we have, but we don't really have any direct numbers to help us measure feed usage. And some numbers that have come out of late with regard to the cattle on feed side of things in Glenn Tonzer's shop here at K-State have indicated that there may be some weakness in that area. So I think we'll be watching that closely. Those numbers as they come out, again, if the quarterly stocks numbers come out here at the end of June, they'll feed right into the July WASDE report. The acreage figures will go right into that. I'd be surprised if we see any change in the yields on those USDA balance sheets. But certainly the acreage figures could, as they go up or down, would impact the supply side, and any surprises high or low on the quarterly stocks numbers and implied usage would impact the demand or use side of those balance sheets. So in markets in the last few weeks that have been pretty negative, really, you're looking for, I guess, any new news that could affect direction, and so we'll see where all that goes.
Also wanting to make a mention of some numbers of the bearish numbers we're seeing in the futures markets.
When you look at the closes yesterday on the futures, we have seen the July corn number to close at 4.13 and a quarter, and we'd been trading closer to 5 for a good long time, or at least 4.75, et cetera. And new crop Geese corn 4.33 and three quarters, and again we've been 4.75, 4.80 in those areas before. July soybeans at 11.52 and a quarter. November new crop harvest at 11.04, and that's down from we had been up over 12 for a while, or at least 11, closer to 11.50, 11.75, et cetera, for a good bit. And wheat, of course, has been on a downtrend for a while. For July, hard red winter wheat closed at 5.92 yesterday, and of course harvest is going on. These numbers again are indicative of the idea that with the information that the market has in hand, it interprets them as basically aiming towards large crops. And you hear this talked about in conferences where analysts get together. So right now we're presuming at the end of June, large crops, and until or unless anything else happens, then that's probably the track they would intend to go all the way to harvest. I would offer that there's an awful lot of risk and uncertainty before we actually get there. And still, our climatologists talk about the likelihood of hot, dry weather in the next 2 or 3 months. So I know where we stand right now, and we have the presumption, the narrative in the market that, hey, large supplies are coming until proven otherwise. So I think right now that for anything to change in these markets, absent geopolitical issues overseas, and that's always possible, that we'd probably have to see weather change course and get extremely dry and change the direction, the attitude, the ability or the willingness to, through volatility, look at the possibility of risky outcomes in any of these markets. So we're at that mode. I would say one surprise in the last minute or so what we have, as for instance, as the corn market has gone down, we have seen cash prices for corn out in western Kansas anyway improve. Here you have the cash basis for corn in Garden City area up to 55 cents, Colby up to 45 cents. All positive, pretty much along the way. So in western Kansas, we've seen a sharp increase, and still you do have for even in the midst of wheat harvest, you have pretty strong cash bids at least in the top bid elevators in the Hutchinson area, South Central. So we have harvest for wheat, and it's affecting the amount of supply that's available in short run. There are still things going on overseas that could lead to a sharp change in the wheat market. But I guess I'm convinced that until we actually see the export buying come in and start to move the market, then we may not see a lot happening. All that said, when you look at the amount of hard red winter wheat export business that we had for the week ending July the 20th, it is the highest it's been for a good while. So maybe these low harvest prices are starting to make U.S. wheat more competitive and give us some opportunities.
Dan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our grain market update.
Thank you very much, Shelby. I appreciate it.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you just ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Friday show talking about scouting cornfields and major disease issues that producers might be seeing in those cornfields with K-State row crop plant pathology specialist Rodrigo Onofre. Rodrigo, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, most certainly. Thanks for having me here.
Rodrigo, you did also write an agronomy update article on this, and starting off this conversation of the importance of going out and scouting those fields.
Yeah, most certainly. I think we're getting close to that VT for the majority of the eastern, kind of like central Kansas as well. I think more than ever, scouting is really important so we can plan ahead for our fungicides application, right?
And talking about a few major diseases that are more common in Kansas, and the first one, southern rust.
Well, that's a very interesting disease because southern rust, it can be a problem for us. However, it has not been reported in Kansas so far. Southern rust is right now Louisiana, I think Georgia as well, in the southern states. And typically we find it here, I would say early July, mid-July, it's when it makes its arrival here in Kansas. But as I mentioned, we haven't found it yet. And when you're scouting for southern rust, right, it could be anywhere on that canopy, from the tassel up those lower leaves, because that disease gets spread through the wind. So when those spores lands, germinate, and infects the plant, it could be pretty much anywhere in that canopy, right? But most importantly is knowing how to differentiate between southern rust and common rust. Common rust we see here in Kansas, I would say early in the season when temperatures are mild, with some of the rainy events too. And common rust, we're going to see, it's kind of like more cinnamon color of those Iridina spores. And we do see common rust on both sides of the leaf, typically. Southern rust, those spores are bright orange. When you see it, it's kind of like hard hard to miss as well. But there is, common rust is more like a cinnamon dark red, and southern rust is more on that bright orange.
Does the southern rust and common rust sometimes rub off?
Yes, both rusts are going to rub off if you try to kind of like poke with your finger, and depending on the levels of rust in your fields too, your shirts or pants could be orange as you're walking down in those cornfields. But again, like southern rust, we do manage with our fungicides, right? But common rust, it's typically, for us here in Kansas, more like an aesthetic disease that we see early on in the season. As temperature rise, southern rust becomes more an issue for us because it likes more that high temperatures, more than 80, and follow with rain events as well.
You mentioned southern rust is not in Kansas yet, or in a perfect world, it doesn't make it to Kansas this year, but does it usually come in from part of the state? Is all the state worried about it?
Yeah, we'll typically pick southern rust in those, I would say, counties more like towards the southern part of the state. Southeast, south central, that's typically where we find southern rust first, and then we start seeing it up in the central northern counties in Kansas. But again, it's not yet reported here, and we'll likely be back here to talk more about it when it shows up. And if it shows up later in the season, perhaps it could not be a problem for us at all.
If it does show up earlier, though, needing to maybe have a fungicide application game plan put together?
Absolutely. Depending when it shows up and how it's progressing, follow with the weather, we might need to put a fungicide for it.
And another disease for us to talk about in corn, gray leaf spot.
Yeah, gray leaf spot, it's, I would say, our year-to-year battle that we have here in Kansas. A lot of our hybrids are quite susceptible and can be a problem if you're corn on corn or have had history with gray leaf spot because it can survive in the crop residue. Gray leaf spot, it's, I would say, we're starting to see gray leaf spot about like two weeks ago, like when disease really started and starts from that bottom up into the canop. I would say check your hybrid susceptibility. Resistant hybrids typically will not need a fungicide. But if you have a moderate susceptible hybrid and have had problems before, I'll definitely keep an eye and keep scouting those fields and see where disease is in the canop. Gray leaf spot, our fungicide recommendations around that VTR1 in terms of timing. There are a lot of good options for managing this disease in terms of our fungicides too, right? And gray leaf spot, it's an interesting disease because it can resemble or can be similar, look like as the bacterial leaf streak that we also see it in corn. And we're actually having quite a bit of reports this year on the bacterial leaf streak already on counties or locations where we had a lot of rain or under irrigation. We do see a lot of the bacterial leaf streak. The biggest difference between the bacterial leaf streak and gray leaf spot is gray leaf spot has those long kind of like rectangular lesions, and the edge of those lesions are, I would say, quite sharp, straight. And the bacterial leaf streak, it's more like a wavy edge, not as straight as a gray leaf spot would be. And our fungicides, right, they will not work for a bacterial disease, but definitely for the gray leaf spot. So properly identification, it's crucial for past use of our fungicides. I would say if you have questions or would like to confirm what you got, work with your K-State extension agents to send us a sample to the plant diagnostic lab. It's always a really good choice.
If people are having trouble identifying whether those edges look wavy or straight for bacterial streak or gray leaf spot, if you hold it up, does it sometimes look different when you look through it?
Yes, if you hold it against a light or the sun, you're going to see the bacterial leaf streak. Again, the edge is going to be wavy, but also the light will pass through it. Gray leaf spot, it's going to be more of that dark central of the lesion, right? The light's not going to go through. And again, the edge of those lesions, they're going to be straight.
Anything people can do for bacterial leaf streak?
I would say hybrid selection might be a better choice for bacterial leaf streak.
And Rodrigo, something we've talked about a few times on the show, but obviously very important when it comes to Kansas corn, tar spot.
Absolutely. I think tar spot is still an emerging disease for us here in Kansas. There's a lot to know and a lot to explore. So far, across, I'd say, the northeast part of the state, very, very low levels of tar spot. I know a lot of folks are scouting their fields weekly and trying to be ahead of the game here too. But again, tar spot, our fungicide timing we're trying to do between V10 and VT for our first application, followed by a second application around R1, R3 if needed, right? A lot of the options too that are available at planting too might need a second application around that V10, VT timing as well. And just remember, it's not just tar spot, right? We're talking about gray leaf spot. We're talking about southern rust. So the biggest concern that I have is if you're putting a fungicide too early for tar spot, right, you might have to go back there around your VTR1 and do a second and perhaps a third application, right?
When they're scouting their fields, where are they likely to seed on that plant once again? And if they see one little spot one place, how quickly is it going to spread?
Yeah, tar spot is... if fields that have had tar spot before, I would say start looking from the bottom up. In fields of the canopy, right? In fields that never had tar spot, I would say anywhere in that canopy you can find tar spot. The lesions are, I would say, like a bug poop. One of the differences that if you get like a wet cloth and try to rub it in that leaf and that lesion, tar spot lesion will not be removed with that wet cloth, right? A bug poop or anything else will definitely be scraped off. The lesions are black, raised, goes on both sides of the leaf, and it can be kind of like irregular shape, being like round, elongated a little bit too. So, but I think the easiest way for me to find or identify tar spot is getting that wet cloth and trying to rub that leaf off and see if the leaf will clean up or not. If it does, if it does clean up, we know it's not tar spot.
And there is a website that is hopefully to help track tar spot around the state. That's
right. I love that website. It's my to-go website in terms of like where tar spot has been reported. And it's that cornIPMpipe.org tar spot. You can find where it's being reported, not just in Kansas, but across the Midwest as well.
And Rodrigo, to round out our conversation, what are some risk factors that producers might want to keep in mind when it comes to thinking about the benefits of a fungicide application?
So I think on the pathology side, right, we like that disease triangle. Make sure that you understand your hybrid susceptibility, not just for tar spot, but gray leaf spot, southern rust as well, how susceptible it is, your hybrids that we're dealing with. 2, is disease present in your field, right? I think a lot of folks are trying to be ahead of the game too, but if you're spraying, there's nothing there. There's not much reason to put that fungicide yet, right? Hold on and put in the right time. And 2, being the pathogen present, as we mentioned, southern rust is not even reported here in Kansas, so it could still show up. And if you're going too early with that application, right, you could definitely need a second one to manage southern rust. And 3, the last part of that triangle is the weather, right? I think keep an eye on the forecast and seeing, we're going through a very hot week right now and very unfavorable for a lot of the disease, including tar spot, right? I think those are the 3 things that I would keep in mind.
Rodrigo, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you.
That was K-State row crop plant pathology specialist Rodrigo Onofre. If you'd like to read more about these fungal diseases in corn, you can check out his Agronomy E-Update article titled Fungicide Considerations for Corn Diseases in 2024. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. Also in the show notes will be a link to corn.ipmpipe.org where you can check out what diseases are in your area and also report them. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with a weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, once again this week, did parts of Kansas get some rain?
We did see some rainfall over the last week. It was fairly sporadic when we consider other previous weeks where there was more rainfall. The locations that saw precipitation this week were the Northwest, and then overnight Thursday and into Friday. And then and that was also portions of central Kansas. Then we had a storm complex that went across the eastern fringe of the state. And rainfall amounts, for the most part, were pretty limited. We had some isolated areas of over an inch to even up to 3 inches up in the far northeast. But other than that, we've been drier than normal for a majority of the state before the last 24 hours. And when we look at drier than normal, we need to have anywhere from about 3/4 of an inch in the southwest to up to an inch to an inch and a quarter in portions of eastern Kansas a week to keep up with rainfall. And so while we did have rainfall, we did not achieve normal for most of those locations, and we had another week without a good widespread precipitation. And when we look at departure from normal, a couple areas do stick out to me. We have the northwest that is really parts of Goodland to Colby and up north to like Liddell. That area has got pretty much no rain for all of the last 30 days. Same with north central Kansas. There's a pocket there, as well as the southeast portion of the state, basically from Wichita eastward, so you get a little bit further to that Parsons area where they did get some rain. But those are the big areas without precipitation. And this time of year, we combine that with really warm temperatures like we have. We've had temperatures in excess of 105, 106 degrees in the southwest, and that's been pretty extreme. And it's not record-breaking for the time of year. We do have some pretty impressive records, but just the volatility of the warm air this year has been really fascinating. Is we'll be cooler than normal one day, and the next day we'll see the temperature jump up 20 degrees with a 30-mile-an-hour south wind. We're sitting right now on the edge of this high pressure. We look further south at Texas, Oklahoma. They've got basically no rain for the last 2 to 3 weeks, and they've been oppressively hot down there. That's the center of that high pressure. And so we keep moving moisture from the Gulf westward into the southwestern United States, up across the Rocky Mountains, and then into Kansas and into the plains. And we saw that with the flooding further north up in South Dakota and Nebraska. Well, that high pressure shrunk a little bit due to a cold front that's kind of pushed down onto it. And that took that storm track a little further south through Kansas. So we did see some moisture overnight into Friday morning. Friday, and the day this airs, is going to be much warmer as that high pressure briefly builds back in, and we get back up into the high 90s to near 100. And then another system comes through and squishes that high pressure down a little bit further. So we get in that storm track on Saturday and Sunday with cooler weather before we start to look into early next week where the high pressure builds, strengthens, and once again, this big fluctuation of that high pressure that's dictating all of our weather and providing that volatile, very high temperatures. And we're going to warm right back up early next week for a couple of days and until we see the next system come through. We're also watching that Gulf. The Gulf is still active. We still keep getting weak systems moving around this high. And until we can cut that off, we're going to continue to see this pattern into July.
What about a little bit past what we'll be seeing for these next few weeks?
Yeah, so thinking about July, I mean, it's summer. We're going to be warmer than normal, like we have been for most summers. We've kind of seen that where our low temperatures, well, obviously the high temperatures have been fluctuating. Our low temperatures have been pretty consistent at to slightly above average for this period. We're going to carry that through next month. I think we will see the Gulf quiet down, especially as the Atlantic hurricane development becomes more likely, and that'll quiet down the Gulf, and we'll likely see high pressure build in. I'm concerned we're going to see those really warm, dry conditions down in Texas and Oklahoma. They're going to expand northward as that high pressure finally takes firm hold. We don't have those weak cold fronts pushing it down, and as a result, I think we're going to finally warm up and dry out in July, and we're likely to see, especially the places that have missed the recent rainfall, some really rapid drought and potentially rapid stress for crops.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.